A weekend that changed everything. Welcome to Silent Confessions, the channel where untold stories come to light, challenging the boundaries of love, trust, and desire. Here we dive deep into the raw emotions, secrets, and unexpected twists that define relationships in ways you never imagined. Each story is more than just words. It's an experience that lingers long after the last sentence. That night rewrote my life in ways I never saw coming. It all started with a simple request from my stepmom, Mia. My dad, a fishing fanatic, was heading out for one of his usual weekend trips, leaving Mia and me alone in the house. But this particular weekend, it was anything but ordinary. This was the weekend that changed everything. This was the weekend that changed everything. Stay tuned to uncover the twists and turns of this unforgettable story, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more confessions that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and relationships. The house felt eerie that Saturday morning. Dad had already left, and his usual boisterous energy was missing. I had just finished my workout, settling into a lazy day, when Mia called me downstairs. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, and it immediately caught my attention. "Jason, can you give me a hand?" she called from the living room. Curious and slightly confused, I headed down, finding her sitting on the couch, looking different. Mia had always been confident, poised, but there was something in her demeanor that felt unsteady. "What do you need?" I asked, standing a few feet away. She smiled, a little nervously, and motioned for me to sit. Her request was strange, but I obliged, dropping onto the couch beside her. She leaned back, crossing her legs, and fixed me with a look I hadn't seen before. Her usual calm gaze carried a weight, a tension that made my pulse quicken. "Jason, you've grown up a lot," she said, her voice light but her words heavy. "You're not the same kid I met a few years ago." Her eyes met mine, lingering just a second longer than usual. There was something in her tone, something unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. I laughed nervously, brushing off the compliment with a shrug, but the way she was looking at me, it wasn't the way a stepmom looks at her stepson. "Yeah, I guess time does that," I replied, my voice cracking slightly. Her smile was soft, almost too soft, as though she knew something I didn't. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls closing in as an unexplainable tension filled the space. I picked up my glass of water, taking a long sip to avoid her gaze, but I could feel her eyes following me, studying me in a way that made my pulse quicken. "You're so much more confident now," she added, leaning slightly closer from where she sat. "It's impressive." There it was again. Her words felt harmless on the surface, but there was a depth to them that stirred something I couldn't name. I forced a grin, trying to steer the conversation into safer territory, but my mind was spinning. Had I imagined it? Was this just innocent small talk, or was there something more? The night unfolded like a slow-burning match, each moment crackling with a strange, unfamiliar energy. Dinner was quiet, but not the comforting silence we usually shared. It was the kind of quiet that made you hyper-aware of every sound, the clink of her fork against the plate, the subtle catch in her breath, the way her hair fell over her shoulder as she looked at me. I found myself watching her more than I should have, my curiosity betraying me. She was beautiful, sure, but she was my stepmom. That line wasn't just a rule, it was a boundary that shouldn't even be approached. And yet, I couldn't deny the pull I felt, the unspoken tension between us that neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. The hours passed, the air growing heavier with every exchanged glance. This was no ordinary weekend. My heart skipped a beat. The air between us felt charged, like an electrical current. I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "I guess, thanks?" She smiled again, but it wasn't her usual warm smile. This one was knowing almost, dangerous. "You're not just a kid anymore. I think we both know that." Her words hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. Something was shifting, something I didn't fully understand but could feel deep in my gut. The silence stretched, and I finally blurted out, "What are you trying to say, Mia?" She looked away for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then she stood up, walking over to the window. "Your dad's gone for the weekend," she said, her back to me. "It's just the two of us." I nodded, feeling my stomach tighten. Where was this going? She turned back to face me, her expression unreadable. I've been thinking a lot lately about us. Her words hit me like a freight train. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded shaky even to me. Us? What do you mean? Mia stepped closer, her presence filling the room as her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. Her voice was soft but carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. You've noticed it too, haven't you? She asked, her words lingering in the air like a secret finally spoken aloud. Her gaze didn't waver, and the space between us suddenly felt charged, as though the air itself had thickened. The way things have changed between us? She continued, her tone almost a whisper but hitting me like a thunderclap. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last as her words sank in. She took another step closer, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of the chair between us, her touch casual but deliberate. We're not just stepmother and stepson anymore. The room seemed to shrink around us. The lines I thought were so clear now blurred into something I couldn't define. Her words hung in the air, daring me to respond, to acknowledge what we both knew but neither of us had admitted until now. Stay tuned, because what happened next changed everything. This is a story of tension, temptation, and a night where nothing was as it seemed. Don't click away, you won't believe how this unfolds. My mind was spinning, trying to process what she was saying. There was a part of me that wanted to run, to escape whatever this was, but another part of me, a darker, more curious part, was rooted in place. Mia, this is crazy, I said, standing up abruptly. You're my stepmom. We can't. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. Why not? She whispered. We're both adults. We make our own rules. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that seemed to cloud my thoughts. This isn't right. But what if it is? She countered, her voice soft but insistent. Her hand brushed against my arm, sending a jolt of electricity through me. The tension between us was suffocating, and I hated how much I felt drawn to her. Over the next few days, everything felt different. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a battleground of emotions. Every glance, every casual touch carried a weight that hadn't been there before. I tried to avoid her, keeping to my room as much as possible, but Mia had a way of finding me, a way of making her presence known. One night, when Dad was working late, I found myself unable to sleep. The silence in the house was deafening. I wandered downstairs, finding Mia sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as I entered, her eyes meeting mine. Couldn't sleep? She asked, her voice soft. I shook my head, sitting as far away from her as I could. But even with the distance, the tension was unbearable. She turned to me, her gaze piercing. Jason, I can't pretend anymore. There's something between us. You feel it too, don't you? I opened my mouth to deny it, to argue, to say anything that might break the spell she was weaving around me. But my voice betrayed me. It faltered, barely a whisper, because deep down I knew the truth. I had felt it too. For months, maybe longer. That subtle shift in the air between us, the unspoken connection that neither of us had dared to name until now. Her eyes softened, but her intensity didn't waver. She stepped closer, closing the space between us like it was the most natural thing in the world. Before I could react, she was beside me, her warmth radiating against my skin, her presence both soothing and unnerving. Then her hand found mine. A simple gesture, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. Her touch was soft, deliberate, yet electric, igniting something I had tried so hard to bury. My heart raced as I stared at her hand on mine, my breath catching in my throat. Mia, I managed, my voice barely audible, but it was as if she already knew what I was going to say, and why I couldn't finish. Her fingers tightened slightly, just enough to send a shiver down my spine. Don't fight it, she whispered, her voice low, almost pleading. Her gaze lifted to meet mine, and for a moment the world outside of this room ceased to exist. I hated how much I wanted more, how my body leaned into her touch, how my mind raced with 1,000 reasons why this was wrong, but none of them seemed to matter. The boundaries I'd clung to were crumbling, and the air between us crackled with an undeniable tension. And then, just as my resolve began to slip entirely, she leaned in, her breath brushing against my cheek, her presence consuming me in ways I wasn't prepared for. This wasn't supposed to happen, but neither of us could stop it. "We can't do this," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. "Who says we can't?" she murmured, leaning closer. Her breath was warm against my skin, and I felt myself being pulled into her orbit. That night, everything changed. Lines were crossed, boundaries shattered, and as much as I wanted to regret it, a part of me couldn't. Over the next few weeks, we lived in a strange limbo, dancing around the truth of what had happened. Every moment alone felt charged, every interaction a dangerous game. But secrets like ours don't stay hidden forever. One evening, as we were sitting at the dinner table, Dad's gaze lingered on me. "You've been spending a lot of time with Mia lately," he said casually, but his eyes told a different story. My heart stopped. I glanced at Mia, who had gone pale. "I guess," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad didn't say anything more, but the weight of his silence was crushing. And in that moment, I realized the truth was catching up to us. There was no escaping what we had done. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. Life isn't always black and white, and sometimes the choices we make lead us down paths we never expected. Silent Confessions has so much more in store. Subscribe to the channel, not to miss what's coming next.